Welcome into Buckeye Beat. I'm Noah Weiskopf, the sports editor of The Lantern here at Ohio State, and I'm joined here by Tyler Danberg, the co-president of Scarlet and Gray Sports Radio, the student radio here on campus. We're going to recap and preview everything involving Ohio State football through the season right here on Buckeye Beat. Number 2, Ohio State will first get off their season with Akron Saturday at 3:30 at the Shoe. It'll be the 10th meeting between the two teams. Ohio State is 8-1 thus far when playing their in-state competition, with their lone loss coming 130 years ago, Tyler, in 1894 when Akron invaded Columbus and downed the Buckeyes 12-6. And before we dive into that game and what to expect, I want to touch on this offseason because it was obviously a really big deal here at Ohio State for the football team, with the several key players being brought in via the transfer portal. To mention Caleb Downs, the 2023 Freshman of the Year, first-team SEC, led Alabama in tackles. Quinshon Judkins, the SEC Freshman of the Year in 2022, a two-time first-team All-SEC player. Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, who's going to be the starting center here. And Will Howard, right, the Kansas State transfer, who's now the starting quarterback. So, just those guys that they brought in through the transfer portal, what do you think they can mean to this team during the season here?
Well, they bring a lot, and they fill the holes of what Ohio State needed and to replenish this past offseason. You take a look at the quarterback position with Kyle McCord transferring out to Syracuse to play for Fran Brown. Will Howard immediately replenishes that depth. You have Devin Brown. You have Aaron Nolan, the highly touted freshman. Julian Sayin transferring into the program after enrolling a semester early at Alabama. There's just a lot going on. Devin Brown being named the backup quarterback to Will Howard. The quarterback is the end-all, be-all, and it starts with the signal caller, no doubt about it. Will Howard brings a lot of that experience as a grad transfer at Kansas State.
And not to mention, this quarterback room is just so deep. You have Julian Sayin, who's your third-string quarterback, but has impressed so many people, including myself, and I'm sure you as well, throughout the spring game, throughout the fall, throughout the preseason. He has looked so good, but being a freshman on this Ohio State quarterback room, you got to wait and you got to earn your stripe here. But not to mention players that are returning, right? You get these players through the portal, but you see Denzel Burke, Donovan Jackson, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Emeka Egbuka, and the list just goes on. But this is all in hopes of beating Michigan, advancing through the playoffs, and eventually, hopefully for them, winning that national championship.
No doubt about it. You take a look at the returners, and one of the first things that when you talk to some of these guys will say is the gold pants that are given out to an Ohio State football team that defeats Michigan. No team has received gold pants since 2019. That's been on the minds of everybody, especially those upperclassmen that have passed it down to the underclassmen and transfers that have been embedded into this program. And when you look at the guys that came back, especially the two edges on the defensive line, and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, the homegrown Pickerington kid, a lot of these guys came back for what Ryan Day, head coach, said is for a greater good. And when they're coming together for a cause that's greater than themselves, that shows that you have the chance to do something special.
And you can just tell from being around this team, from talking to these players in press conferences, that the vibes are just so high and they expect so much out of themselves. And I wanted to mention, too, this within the past couple of weeks now, Ryan Day has named Tegra Shabola will be the starting right guard, named Sonny Styles, saying that he'll be the starting will linebacker here against Akron, lining up next to Cody Simon, who in the recent couple of weeks is the Block O recipient, which is a huge deal for him. And just for all positions, Ryan Day wanted to mention that they're going to be rotating players. It's not just going to be Tegra and Sonny are the two starting guys for this game. In a game against Akron, they're going to get a lot of different guys in there, get a lot of looks at some younger guys, and really be able to see what they have. But overall, grade out 80% or more, what Ryan Day keeps saying, grade out a champion. They want to win these reps and play those minimum of 15 snaps to be able to do so.
And it's important to face these non-conference opponents. And Akron, defensively, they're no slouch. They were a top 35 total defense last year in all of college football. They return a lot. They bring in some key transfer pieces from Power 5 schools, the chance to start and get more playing time, and they're going to have an increased role. You take a look at one guy, for example, the safety from Cornell, Philip Lewis III. They're going to be guys that get the chance to play for Akron and go up against an Ohio State offense that has been statistically great under Ryan Day, but they're also going to have some new challenges with guys, like you said, rotating on the offensive line. It's a good test for both the Ohio State offense and the Akron defense.
And we've heard in recent days, right, Ryan Day talked about not wanting to look at Akron as their opponent. They want to focus on themselves. Jack Sawyer said the same thing. They really want to make sure that they are doing their job, and they understand that the rest of it, if they're doing their job, the rest will take care of itself. But Will Howard, we heard from Howard on Tuesday at the Woody, and he is just so amped to get out there. You can tell from the way he's talking about getting into the shoe, get his debut underway. For Ryan Day, he just said he wants consistency. He wants to get a good feel for he wants him to get a good feel for the game, wants him to take control of this offense. What are you looking for on Saturday to see out of Will Howard in his first career start as a Buckeye?
Well, when you're surrounded by so many weapons, right, all you have to do is just to distribute. And I think that takes a little bit of a pressure off the quarterback who comes into a new system, faces a new offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly, who replaced a new offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien. So there's a lot of moving parts in the Ohio State offense, especially in the months of January and February. That can be a lot for a quarterback that comes into a new program. And it was interesting how Will Howard, when he spoke on Tuesday at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, he said, with this receiving group, one-on-one balls almost look like the receivers are wide open. He said these Ohio State receivers have a different definition of what a wide open ball looks like. So I think that takes pressure off the quarterback. You look for him to try and take a couple deep shots. You use this time to test defensive backs, test the secondary, and just get acclimated to a new environment for the first time in real time.
I mean, when you look at his weapons on the outside, you have Emeka Egbuka, who's going to be in 2025 a first to second round pick in the NFL draft. You have Carnell Tate, who showed a lot last year, who's expecting to take a huge leap. You have guys that are waiting like Brandon Inniss, but not to mention a freshman who's going to be getting some significant play time in Jeremiah Smith, the #1 overall recruit coming into Ohio State in the country, is expected to play early and often. Ryan Day simply responded with yes when asked if we're going to see Jeremiah Smith early in this game. Could he be the first 500-yard receiving freshman since Jalen Marshall was 1 yard shy in 2014 with 499 yards? Could Jeremiah Smith be the one to finally break that and get through 500 yards?
That's the essential question, and if you know this program at all over the last few months, you'd have to say yes, there's a good shot that he does it. First off, the chance to start as a true freshman and be on the field for the first offensive snap of the year says a lot about what this program sees in you. Ryan Day speaks a lot about Jeremiah Smith, the #1 prospect in the overall high school class coming out of high school this past year. Spoke a lot about his maturity, and that's what you have to have when you come out of high school and you want to try and play for a top 3 program in college football immediately. You got to have the maturity.
And this Ohio State wide receiver room has been doing this kind of stuff for a long time now. They mentioned his maturity. Ryan Day also mentioned Emeka's maturity. He saw the same thing in Emeka when he came in as a freshman. So it's really just, is it wide receiver U? We don't know, but it arguably is. But this wide receiver room and everything that they go through with Brian Hartline, now with Chip Kelly, the development that they're able to have here is why you're seeing a lot of these wide receivers continuing to go on to come to Ohio State and develop their game and hopefully take it to the next level.
And you hear the term pressure taken off a lot, especially around this program. The receivers take a lot of the pressure off a transfer quarterback in Will Howard. I think the running back depth is also going to take some pressure off the receivers. Now, it might not be as deep in numbers, but it's definitely deep in talent. When you have Travion Henderson, multiple-time All-Big Ten running back, and then joining him is the active leading rusher in the Power 5 since 2022 in Quinshon Judkins, that helps take pressure off the receivers. And then you take a gander at James Peoples, true freshman running back who can slot in at that third string with the running back room already taking a loss with T.C. Caffey's season-ending injury. So, like we said before, the running back room is not as deep in numbers and in bodies. However, they make up for that in the skill, the endurance, and the talent that they have.
And we've heard Carlos Lachlan, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, all of them talk about the strides that James Peoples made as a freshman. He could be the one seeing some time as well outside of the two of them, especially this weekend against Akron. But you look at how Travion and Quinshon are going to work together. And the biggest thing that you get out of the two of them when speaking with them at press conferences is they don't want to compete for touches. They both genuinely want to be great. They want to have a great team, and they know that having a great team is going to boost everything for them and their future eventually in the NFL. But I want to talk about this defense because the offense gets so much attention with these weapons that they have. But now, led by Jim Knowles, they're expecting a massive, massive season. They're getting guys back, like we mentioned earlier, JTT, Jack Sawyer, Tyleek Williams, Ty Hamilton. At corner, they have Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, Jordan Hancock, Jermaine Matthews. I mean, this team is just so deep on defense. And even a guy like Sonny Styles, who's able to make a transition from safety, he was a safety last year playing for this team, now a starting will linebacker. I mean, how deep is this defense, and what do you expect from them this weekend and then beyond?
Well, you mentioned Sonny Styles. I think that is the indicator on how deep this defense is. When one of your starting safeties adds 12 pounds, undergoes a position change from DB at 19 years old to linebacker and gets the starting job, and then his backup is the #1 recruit in the class of 2022 high school prospect class. I think that says a lot about how deep the defense is, especially in the middle. And you take a look at that defensive backfield. Another transfer that they brought in was Keenan Nelson Jr., who has some experience at South Carolina. That alone just helps bolster depth. You've got SEC experience. Really, you've got 3 defensive backs that have faced SEC offenses in Caleb Downs, in Davison Igbinosun, and then you factor in Nelson as well. And I think that adds a little bit of a Southern flavor to that Jim Knowles-led defense that certainly speaks for itself. They have one of its best seasons in school history from a defensive standpoint last year. But the one thing that you hear about this year that they're really hungry for is more pressure on the quarterback, hungry for more sacks. On the defensive secondary side, hungry for more turnovers. Denzel Burke, for example, the All-American cornerback, has been practicing with the jugs machine. He wants to get more INTs and PBUs this year, and that's going to be really important as well in breaking up passes and catching passes as well. That's just as important.
And pressure is the biggest thing for any defense in football. If you have pressure, it wreaks havoc on an offense. An offense doesn't know what to do when they're pressured. And so being able to do that, those guys off the edge, Jack Sawyer, JTT coming off the edge, the interior guys being able to create pressure is just going to help all those cornerbacks. And like we mentioned, that depth at cornerback is really impressive. There's just, in general, on this defense, all over the place, so much NFL talent that will eventually come out, but you have them all in Columbus for this season with the end goal being to beat Michigan and go all the way. But I want to look a minute at Akron because I think a lot of people have been overlooking Akron as a team. And just to talk a little bit about them, they are led by starting quarterback Ben Finley, who's a transfer, played 3 seasons at NC State and last season at Cal Berkeley. In his career, 13 games, 4 career starts with 1,484 pass yards, 7 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. The numbers aren't the best, but he has experience with Power 5's teams.
And he's got experience, too, in the family. And when you come from a football bloodline, that certainly pays dividends. His brother Ryan is the all-time passing leader at NC State, 2 years in the NFL with the Cincinnati Bengals. He beat the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football. That's one of his big achievements in his NFL time. But when you look at Ben Finley as a quarterback, I mean, there's a lot that you can jump to, but a good arm, he's got a big arm, but also, too, he has the experience in high leverage scenarios. And that's what stuck out off the page. When Devin Leary with NC State, when he was out in 2022 for a rivalry game against North Carolina, in stepped Ben Finley against the number 18 Tar Heels in Chapel Hill. What did he do? He helped the Wolfpack to a double overtime win. And when you're doing that in limited playing time, not too many starts, that says a lot. So he's no stranger to big environments like what the Horseshoe is going to be at 3:30 on this Saturday.
No doubt. And then you look at their defense, right? They've brought in a lot of guys, and they had a top defense, like we mentioned last year, top 35. And you look at their defense, they brought in 4 DBs via the transfer portal from Power 5 schools to add depth. And that's highlighted by, you mentioned one previous Cornell player, but we're mentioning now Damon David, who was a 4-star recruit to Oregon originally, transferred to Akron in February. I mean, this defense, they're going to have a test with the Ohio State starting offense, but at the same time, they've got guys that have been in those big games. And for Akron, I mean, this is one of those massive games that they want to come out and shock the world.
No doubt about it. Trying to get that first win, like you said, 130 years against Ohio State. The Horseshoe wasn't around back in 1894 to tell you how long it's been since the Zips last won in Columbus against Ohio State, but you're absolutely right. Joe Moorhead and his staff had figured out the recipe of what guys to bring in. Power 5 guys with some experience, but coming to Akron, a Mid-American Conference school, middle of the pack in the conference, is going to allow them the chance to get an increased playing time, the chance to potentially start. I mean, you look at Alex Adams, the wide receiver, first-team All-MAC last year. He comes in from LSU. You take a gander at junior college transfer and C.J. Nanali on the edge. He's a Bronco Nagurski watch list selection. He's going to be a guy to watch out for because he just flies all over the place. 7th in the MAC in sacks last year and 2nd in tackles for loss. So a lot of these newcomers that have come into the Akron program the last 2 years and the ones coming into this year, they're going to look to try and wreak a lot of havoc. And you see them plenty on the defensive side of the ball.
And these sports books are not expecting necessarily the closest game, right? We see a 50.5-point spread for Ohio State. We see the over-under set at 58.5. So not necessarily expecting the closest game, but Akron, they've got players that have been there before, been in these big games, just maybe not the biggest role. So now you get to see what they got with Akron and these new guys coming along. But I want, before we sign off, to look around the league, around college football, around the country. There's some relatively big games coming up here in week 1. First of all, I'll highlight them real quick and then we'll make our picks. Number 19, Miami against the Florida Gators. Number 8, Penn State is heading to Morgantown to take on West Virginia. We've seen number 14, Clemson. We're going to see them take on the number 1 team in the country in Georgia. We're going to see number 7, Notre Dame take on number 20, Texas A&M. And finally, we'll make our picks, maybe not so surprising, for Akron versus number 2, Ohio State. So I'll ask you first, for number 19, Miami against the Florida Gators, who do you want to take in this game?
Well, the last time Florida hosted a ranked opponent for the season opener was number 14, Utah, back in 2022. Anthony Richardson and the Gators were able to forge a comeback victory and win at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. I think they're going to repeat themselves and shock a couple people, especially with what the back end of their schedule offers. A win against Miami could be major for Billy Napier.
I agree with you, especially, Anthony Richardson, you mentioned current Colts quarterback. I will take Graham Hurts as well, his experience at Florida, and I think it'll be a super, super tight game here, but ultimately, I guess the upset then, at Florida at home, they're going to take it home. We're going to mention as well, I'm going to stop at number 8, Penn State versus West Virginia in Morgantown. Real tough place to play. Feels just like a game that Penn State wins. I feel like every year, they win the games they should. Ohio State and Michigan pose some sort of different disadvantage for Penn State, but I think that this is a game that Penn State wins. Drew Aller has something to prove this year. If he has a big year, he's going to be a first-round pick probably in the 2025 NFL Draft. It's a great atmosphere in Morgantown. I think that ultimately Penn State gets it done, though.
Drew Aller threw only 2 picks last year as well, and for as big of an arm he has, he also can pinpoint it very well. And maybe they'll have him turn it loose a little bit more this year and throw deeper downfield and utilize that cannon of an arm. I agree with you, Noah. I think Penn State's going to get the victory, but it's going to be a battle. I mean, you look at last year, Penn State and Drew Aller, they were able to play really well against West Virginia, but that was at home, and that was the whiteout game. Now you go to Morgantown. I think they've already canceled class on Friday.
They have.
In Morgantown.
Yep.
So there's going to be a lot resting in this ball game, but I do think the Nittany Lions pull it out.
And then number 14, Clemson, will take on number 1, Georgia. While it's at a neutral site, it's in Atlanta. So we're looking at this game. Do you think that Georgia has a chance at getting upset here against Clemson?
There definitely is a chance. There's a lot of expectations about Clemson this year after a couple disappointing campaigns under Dabo Swinney. He has a very unique approach in this day and age, does not bring in a lot of transfers. You can make the same argument for Georgia, but they've leaned into the transfer portal a little bit more this year as well, especially getting Trevor Etienne from Florida, going to jump over to the other side of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. But I think Georgia's going to get the victory here. When you take a look at it down the road, Carson Beck is going to possibly be at the New York Athletic Club in December. There's definitely a chance he could be hoisting college football's prized possession at the end of the year, and there's a lot of skill around Georgia. Maybe not as much of the hype around the defensive line as it has been in years past, but it's still a really talented defense. Keep an eye on Smile Munden up front. He's another great havoc wreaker for Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp.
I don't think too deep about this game when I'm looking at it, right? You have Kirby Smart, you have this defense still that might, it's hard to live up to expectations from previous years because it feels like every year Georgia's defense gets better. But they have a really solid defense. Look, they haven't lost a regular season game since 2020. So you can't pick a Clemson team here to go into Atlanta and beat Georgia. I'm going to take Georgia by a decent amount. I think Carson Beck is a really, really great quarterback, and I think that you mentioned the Heisman Trophy. I think that, in the draft, he could be the first quarterback taken. He could be a top 3 pick. Give me Carson Beck in this game. Number 7, Notre Dame against number 20, Texas A&M. And I think I will pick A&M at home. I think their defensive line is elite. I think that, like we mentioned earlier in the show, pressure is such a pivotal turning point for defenses. I think they'll be able to wreak havoc against Notre Dame. I think that ultimately A&M will get this done at home. What do you think? And an upset, I guess, number 20 versus number 7 Notre Dame team.
You factor in Kyle Field, the 12th man. This is the Stadium Pulse game of the week because that place is going to be rocking in Aggie land. College Station is going to be on fire come Saturday night. But it's a unique dynamic as well. Mike Elko, former Duke head coach, going up against his former quarterback, Riley Leonard, now at Notre Dame. You wonder, who gets the edge of whom? Because does Riley Leonard have an edge after he's been seeing what Mike Elko dials up defensively for the last few years? Does Mike Elko have an edge on Riley Leonard and the Notre Dame offense because he's been able to see firsthand and work with him firsthand? Or does this just have no effect at all? Is this a complete washout because Leonard goes into a new offensive system with Notre Dame and Mike Elko moves from the ACC to the SEC? We can play the speculation game. I'm going to go with Notre Dame getting the victory. I think they have a good squad. Marcus Freeman gets better as his tenure has really increased. So I'm going to go with the Fighting Irish. I think this is the first time we've disagreed so far.
So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think this could be the best game of the week. It could be one of the top games of the year. I think it's going to be really fun to watch, see who gets it done. The last pick we'll have here, Akron versus Ohio State. I don't think that either of us are going to take Akron in this game, but I will throw a different audible out at you. Minus 50.5 for Ohio State. Do you think they cover 50.5 points against this Akron squad?
I think it'll be right near the line. I think the line is a very, very deep one. I mean, 50.5 is a lot of points to cover, and you never know if there are going to be a lot of adjustments, a lot of seeking things out throughout the game. There's always a little bit of a learning curve that comes from week one, but again, this is one of the most talented teams in college football's recent memory. I think I am going to go Akron, just take the points there if I were to, just because it's a deep line, but it's going to be very close, and I do think Ohio State is going to win this ball game. I think it'll be a 56-10 victory.
Okay, I think that it's really crazy to look at the over/under as well. 58.5 with the 50.5 point spread. I think that really tells you. But you mentioned that it's going to be close to that spread, and it definitely will be. For whatever reason, they always know. They always get the spread spot on. It's always within a couple. So I think that actually I can't take a 50.5 point spread for Ohio State. I think that Akron is a solid enough team to be able to put up a fight for a little bit. I think that they could score a touchdown here in the first couple drives, and then Ohio State's defense will settle in and take it to them. But I think that this is going to be closer than a 51-point game. I'd probably have to take Akron with the points, but I do think that Ohio State's roster, what they have, everyone coming back, the transfers, Jeremiah Smith is a true freshman who's going to make an impact. And in this game, we're going to see a lot of depth. We're going to see what real depth this football team has. I'm going to take Ohio State, but I'm going to take Akron with the points. And any other just big headlines through this game or through any other games, anything?
I got a question for you, Noah. Who is a breakout player for Ohio State in this game that fans may not know of now, but they might at the end of Saturday?
I think it's easy to say Brandon Inniss, but at the same time, I think he's going to play a good amount. I think a guy like Kojo Antwi will be really fun to watch. I know he's a speedster, And just being able to see him in this offense, I don't know if he's going to necessarily play with Will Howard, but he might play with some backup quarterbacks. I don't know if they're going to end up throwing in Devin Brown and then a guy like Julian Sain. I don't know if all three will play, but I think for sure Brown will get some time there in the second half. I think Kojo Antwi might be not only a fun name, but a fun guy for fans to sort of latch onto.
The St. Rita product, Chicago kid. Him and Carnell Tate.
No doubt. And that will do it for the first episode of Buckeye Beat. We will catch you guys next time. For Noah Weiskopf, Tyler Danberg, we'll see you next week.